Good morning, everyone. This is the meeting of the Pensions Committee held on the 5th of March. As usual, I'm going to make an announcement regarding the COVID situation. Attendance at this meeting. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones on once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. If you experience connections or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched off if and when speaking is in the meeting, on and off. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raise hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate on each item, business there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Breaks will be occurring during the meeting and as and when the opportunity arises, to ensure that we don't get stiff legs or need a break for other reasons. So I will be calling them as and when. The membership of the meeting, I'm going to ask each member to introduce themselves, starting with Stephen Bolton, please.
Good morning, Stephen Bolton. I'm the member for Hatfield Rural.
Now, Bob Deering, yes, Bob Deering's going to be here because I've seen him.
Yes, hello everybody, I'm Bob Deering. I'm the member for St Andrews Division, Hertford.
Steve Drury is the one that I'm not sure is with us or not. Just give him a second to join if he's able to. Otherwise, we've received a communication that he's having connection problems this morning, so we'll take it as an apology. Margaret Eames Patterson, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
It's Eames Peterson, actually.
Sorry,
just so you know.
Apologies, Margaret. I'm so used to calling you Margaret. I don't get to call you by your given name at the your family name at the end.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm Margaret Eames Peterson. I'm representing Hatfield North Division on the County Council, and I'm the Labour rep on the Pension Committee and on the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. John Graham.
Good morning, I'm John Graham. I'm the member for Potters Bar East.
Adam Mitchell, who's the Vice Chairman.
I'm Adam Mitchell, Vice Chairman. I'm the member for Broadwater and Stevenage.
Robin Parker. Haven't seen Robin this morning.
Oh, stroke of luck. Pensions Committee.
Okay, I'm assuming that Robin's having difficulty joining us as well. Maybe Elaine could to just find that out for us, please. Hello. Okay. Sean Quilty. Seamus Quilty's on. Seamus, are you with us?
I'm chasing him as well, Chairman.
Okay. Lots of late breakfasts, it would appear. Ralph Sangster, that's me, Chairman of the Pension Committee, and a member for Rickmansworth West. Richard Smith.
Richard Smith, I'm the member for Welwyn Division.
Thank you all. I believe we have Joan Lloyd with us and Stephen Merkowitz, but I'm told that Paul Mason has not been able to join us as observers. So I think that completes the list of people. So part one opens with the business of declarations of interest. If members are invited to declare any interest that you may have in one of the items on the agenda, or you may raise it at the point at which we discuss it. Is there anybody who would like to raise a declaration of interest at this time? No, okay. Minutes of the last meeting. These are the minutes, part 1 minutes of the meeting that was held on the 27th of November. Are there any issues that you have regarding them, or can I take them as being an accurate record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Don't see anybody with their hands up, so I'll take them as that. I will sign them as and when appropriate in the time in the future when I'm in County Hall. Item 2 is the risk performance report, and Anne is going to be providing us with the update on this item. So Anne.
Thank you, Chair. This is the risk and performance report for the quarter ending December 2020. In section 5, we have analysed scheme employers by risk categories. Red risk rated employers decreased by 1 in the quarter, with the breakdown of their ongoing deficit position detailed in Table 3. The number of employers being monitored under each risk category is outlined in Appendix A. The admission agreement policy has been reviewed by the fund solicitor in line with the review terms in the policy. The policy was updated to bring further clarity to the 3-month timeframe to provide the fund with the signed documents, as previously this had only been communicated via email with the policy. We have now taken the action to defer the members of 2 admission bodies who have failed to comply with this policy. They are both in the over a year category. One scheme employer being an academy and the second scheme employer being a maintained school. Following the drafting of this paper, 5 admission agreements are due to arrive at County Hall for sealing, all of which are in the over a year category. The 3 other employers in this category are experiencing third-party delays, such as the review of their bond agreement with their bank. Fund officers continue to engage with employers with outstanding exit payments from last quarter, with the majority of these employers being community admission bodies, such as citizen advice bureaus and housing associations. We've agreed a repayment plan with the employer with the largest deficit, which was approximately £2 million. They are in the midst of reviewing the legal documents. Fund officers will continue to engage with the remaining employers to agree a repayment plan. The performance monitor in section 6 highlights the preparation of the 2021 audit with our external auditors. And following discussions at last committee meeting, we've included further detail of employers' late payment performance over the last 6 months. This is referred in the table in Appendix C. Details of complaints and IDRPs are outlined in Appendix A, and LPP's performance against their SLAs remains elevated above their target of 95%. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Anne. Any questions from members of the committee, please? Don't see any hands going up.
Can I put my hand up?
Yeah, great. Yeah, John, yeah.
Yeah, just Chairman, can I just say that having got the report, there feels a confidence here that this situation is under control. I know in the early days of joining this pension committee, I know you in particular were concerned about some of these issues, but having read the report and listened to the presentation, I feel as though we've now got a handle on it, particularly getting hold of this late payment and getting a payment agreement with them. So I think from my side, just feel well done. We've moved forward a lot.
Yes, thank you, John. I think that's a very, very pertinent point. It's all well and good recording what the position is in situations such as this, but it's another thing actually taking action to prevent it continuing. And I think we've got that circle of that virtuous circle now, where we have a record of what's going on, but we also have a plan to resolve them. So that's an extremely good result. Adam.
Could I just ask the officers perhaps look at the formatting of the table on page 27 to 30? It's very good to have the extra information, but I just wonder if we could have a look at that again.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I think this came up at, I think, yesterday's briefing meeting, and as this is a new set of information, I don't think the tabulature or the organisation of the information is particularly user friendly. So I think that we would be welcome to see a revision to that at the next report cycle.
Thank you.
Margaret?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm very sorry. I'm having a few IT problems. My camera's not working. Sorry about that. I don't think it's working. Is it working?
No, we can't see you. We've got your
Yeah.
smiling face. We've got your smiling face nonetheless, but
Okay, yes. I'm just a little concerned. So 2 of the employers which have not complied with the payment agreement are schools who are obviously within, well, have a relationship with County Council. The academies we've always been a little bit concerned about, actually, what I have, if they didn't comply and not preparing for how they're going to pay the pension contributions. But the school that is under within the County Council, can we, what can the County Council do to investigate what is really going on? Because obviously in COVID, some schools are going through some very difficult times. I know as a county councillor helping some of the primary schools in my locality, could we actually investigate whether what do we have an obligation to do, or do we have any within the county council to help with this pension contribution?
okay, Margaret, let me just put that a little bit more succinctly. Anne, what are the status of these 2 schools? Who are responsible for them, and what action can we take to resolve the situation?
Thank you. With regards to the admission body that is related to the maintained school, that maintained school has a solicitor appointed by HCC to work with our solicitor, the fund solicitor, in order to progress this further. However, due to the disagreement between the maintained school and the admission body, that is the reason why we've needed to defer those particular members, as the school and the admission body are not in agreement with each other. So at the minute, they are being supported with their own HCC solicitor. But at the minute, the fund can only continue to engage with them.
Are we allowed to know which school?
I think that would be not at this moment in time. If we were in part 2, yes, Margaret, but I think it would be inappropriate now.
Is it possible to postpone that to part 2?
We can ask. I'm sure Patrick will know who it is, and we'll ask it then.
Okay, that's okay.
Thank you.
But well, I guess, and just to ask the other 3, it was 5, wasn't it, that haven't complied? Is that correct?
2 employers have not complied with the policy. 5 admission bodies that are within the over a year category are due to send their documents back for sealing.
Okay.
Yes.
And so they're being chased, and we are optimistic that if they're over a year, that actually has breached the time limit, hasn't it?
I suspect the reason that they are sending it back is because they've approached the year end, and we've started snapping the whip.
Yes.
So they are sort of amber warning. Is that right? Yeah. I mean, do we put penalties when they have breached the time?
When they have breached the time limit, we do threaten deferral. So they are very adamant to try and get those documents sent back to us.
There's no financial penalty, Margaret, but there is a reputational one, in so much as if we send letters to all of their members who have subsequently been deferred because they haven't managed to agree the arrangements and seal them, then their reputation is going to look a little bit on the dodgy side.
Yes, and this academy that has breached it, effectively not complied with the payment agreement, presumably letters have already gone to realise that their fund holders are now deferred, which is which is really bad for their staff.
Yes, Margaret, but it's the only way we have of leveraging the position.
Can we know that academy as well, please, in part 2?
Yes, I have that information to hand.
Thank you, and I presume that is covered by the same privacy that it would.
I'd sooner not be naming and shaming people around the part 1 area. Part 2 is fine. If councillors are responsible enough to maintain security around that information, but I think part 1 would be inappropriate at this moment in time.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? I don't see any, so let me see. The recommendation is that the pension committee notes and comments on this report, which I think we have done. Elaine, you don't need me to ask for a vote on that, do you?
Yes, please, Chairman, just for the...
You would like me to? Okay. All right, so can we agree that we've noted the report, please, in the chat function? I think we've seen enough agrees in there from my perspective. I'll wait for yeah, okay, Elaine to confirm, but let's move on in the meantime. Yeah, chat. Okay, item 3 is the risk register report, which is presented again. Sorry, am I on the same one? Yes, I am. Apologies. Item 4 is the Treasury Management Strategy for the pension fund, and that's being presented by Matt Antic.
Sorry, Ralph, I think we are on item 3.
Yeah.
Was it? The fact that Anne was presenting them again, I was confused then. So, Anne,
she is
with us. The risk register report, and you're reporting on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is the risk register report for the quarter October to December 2020. The management of pension fund risks has remained consistent with last quarter, with the addition of one new risk relating to pension transfer fraud. This has been reflected in the risk dashboard in Appendix A. Fund officers have drafted a risk management policy using SIPFA's guidance on managing risk in the LGPS. This outlines the fund's approach to managing risk. It also provides further detail about how each risk is evaluated and scored, which is in line with the Hertfordshire County Council's risk scoring mechanism. This policy has also been reviewed by the fund actuary, with their comments being implemented in this final draft. This policy is detailed further in Appendix C. We'll continue working together with LPP to ensure that the risks are managed effectively, and we will continue to seek improvements where possible. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Anne. I'm just going to start off by just highlighting, which I did yesterday and got a good response from Patrick, the difference between the two schedules, which seem to duplicate each other, but don't. And Patrick, maybe you could, or Anne, maybe you could just explain the difference between the two different schedules.
I can come in, Chairman. The difference between the two schedules is the first schedule gives you a description of the risk and how that risk is scored. The second schedule gives you a description of the control, if the risk is controllable, that is in place to mitigate that risk. And so there is a clear difference between the two. The first schedule is about the description of the risk, and the second schedule is about how that risk is controlled or managed to the extent it can be controlled.
Thank you very much. Adam, you've got a question.
Yes, I noted when reading the report that there aren't any red risks, and I was just wondering if officers could tell us, because some of the risks are quite similarly scored, which do we perceive to be the highest risk of all of our amber risks, if you like?
Thank you, Adam. At the minute, we do score these risks individually with Patrick, myself, and our fund accountant. So I'll just pass it on to Patrick as he's got his hand up to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. There is an element of subjectivity when you're analysing risks of this nature, and we have introduced a challenge process amongst the officer team, and which Anne has referred to, in that myself, Anne, the fund accountant, and Matt Nendick, who's my deputy, get together and discuss these risks and how the scores have been arrived at. In answer to your question of what we would assess as the amber risks which we are concerned about, Obviously, there are risks that are market related and risks around climate change, RI, but risks that I would be concerned about would be unpaid employer costs, employers facing financial difficulties, and anything with regard to data, third-party administrators who are managing our data, cybercrime, and obviously the new risk that is on this register, which is the pension transfer risk. Cybercrime we are really concerned about, and we have been talking to LPPA, who are the third-party administrators for the fund, getting assurances from them about their ISO accreditations, internal and external reports. There is guidance from the pensions regulator about what we should be looking at in managing this risk. And Anne has, in the narrative, put quite a lot of detail in there about what that risk is and how we're trying to manage it. So those would be the risks that I would flag, that we've probably got an element of sort of more direct control to an extent, in that we can talk to our third parties and make sure they've got project plans in place and the relevant controls. Market related risks, they're a bit more difficult to control, but we've been doing work over the last 12 months, which you are aware of, on the equity protection, trying to limit the impact on returns. And we're developing our RI policy with regard to how we will look at climate risk, and that will evolve over time. So that's what I would say in answer to your question, Adam.
Thank you very much.
John.
Chairman, yes, the last risk that we put in, the pension transfer fraud, I've been learning a little bit more. I know that we're supposed to be signing up to a pledge by the end of January 2021. Just interested to know a bit, because if I understand right, during the lockdown, the number of pension frauds, I believe, have risen as people have been at home. And it's good to see we put this on a risk, but it might be useful just to learn a little bit more about the pension scam pledge and what does that mean for us, because clearly it's a mitigating factor in your risk register. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Just a bit more detail about the pension transfer pledge. This is something that the pensions regulator has introduced in order, as you rightfully mentioned, there have been a number of scams and fraud that has been occurring to a number of pensioners recently. So they've put this pledge in place for a number of funds to voluntarily sign up to, in order to try and bring down the number of those occurrences.
Patrick.
I'll just add, in answer to your question, John, that the LPPA, when we have any requests from a member for a transfer of their LGPS pot, so to speak, to another provider, that the LPPA will ask for assurances in written documentation from that individual that they've taken independent financial advice. And we will not transfer any pot of money unless we've got those assurances, because it also protects the fund from a future legal action by that individual who subsequently may have been missold a new pension benefit scheme, which subsequently manifests itself to be a lot poorer than the one they transferred from. And so we and the LPPA in particular have put in this framework to manage that potential legal claims in the future, by insisting that we have notification, some form of letter that this individual has taken independent financial advice.
Okay, John.
Yes, thank you very much. No, that's very comprehensive, because, yeah, thank you.
I think it's worth noting that much of the fraud that's taken place has done so in the private sector pension realm. I'm not so sure so much has taken place in the local authority realm. principally because I think our pension is so good. It's very difficult for a financial advisor to say you ought to change your position. But Patrick might say just a quick word about that.
Thank you, Chairman. There are cases in the local government pension scheme where individuals have been influenced by the marketing and selling of alternatives that has influenced that individual's decision to move away from the local government pension scheme into what was perceived to be a better scheme. I would totally agree that I don't think there's many better schemes out there than this one, and I'm aware there are claims in the local government pension schemes that individuals are bringing because they allege that they weren't informed of the issues that they may incur by transferring. Yeah, it's difficult. And what we can do now is try and put mitigations in place to control those events happening in the future. And I know a lot of my colleagues in other funds are doing the same thing, where if they have an internal administration team or an external provider like ourselves working with those providers to ensure that the proper controls are in place and advice that we can provide to an extent to those individuals who are considering transfer. We are not financial advisors. That's why we're insisting that we see whatever financial advice these individuals are taking, and we will challenge challenge those individuals for the LPPA. Are you absolutely certain that you are making the right decision?
Okay, John, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, because in the private sector, where I'm a trustee of a private firm, there's now a requirement by the pensions regulator to make an annual statement of exactly what Patrick has said. So I appreciate what you say in the local government scheme, but in the private scheme, there's an obligation now on trustees to implement these types of schemes to stop the transfers and say what steps they've taken. Anyway, only for comment, but it's good to see we're taking the lead. I take your point, the scheme is so good, but people do not understand pensions, and as Patrick very politely worded it, some people are swayed by advertising.
Yeah, I think you're right there, John. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I think we need to accept or note the report, in which case, again, in chat, if you wouldn't mind, please, making your determination. Agree if you agree. I think there's a lot of agreement there, so we'll move on. Now, I think I've got the right item now. We're moving on to the Treasury Management Strategy for the Pension Fund, and Matt Nendick is going to be presenting.
Sorry, Chairman, it won't be Matt, it'll be myself. I've got Matt working on other things this morning, so I'll present this report.
Yeah, so he's got his nose to the grindstone, has he?
He has. I'm sweating him this morning.
Very good.
Right, so this the Treasury Management Strategy, it comes before this committee every year. It sets out the strategy for how we manage operational cash for the pension fund. We are required under regulations to not commingle pension fund cash with corporate council cash. So we have a separate strategy for how we manage the county council's day-to-day balances and borrowing and investments, and this is a separate one that we have for the fund. What this strategy sets out is the background as to why we're required to do this. We're under regulations, we're required to prepare this strategy. It sets out in section 5 the current position, how much money we've got in table 4. We have a cap, and that is agreed under the investment strategy statement, and that cap is 1%. We very rarely go near that cap. The current cap in place for this year is 48 million. The proposed cap for next year is the same value. We will, if we're getting near 35 million, have a conversation with our external consultants about advice on how we should reduce this cash and move it into other asset classes. and then that advice will be shared with the chairman and the chief financial officer for sign off an agreement, and officers will then implement that instruction. You will see in the report also there's a bit of a detail under section 6 around the proposed treasury management strategy. Appendix A sets out the policy and the institutions that we will lend to and the limits of lending and the credit ratings that we measure those counterparties against. Essentially, this operational cash is used for paying pensions and payments of invoices. It's there is no investment to the extent that they're long-term cash deposits of 6 months. It all tends to be invested in short-term deposits with banks and money market funds. So the recommendations in this report are that the members of the committee approve the proposed treasury management strategy and the cap of 1% of fund assets, which was, the cap is measured at the last audited accounts, which was the 31st of March last year, which was 4.8 billion. And so the cap is 48 million. That's all I was going to say, Chairman, and invite questions.
Okay, Adam's got a question first, then I'll chip in.
Thank you. I'm looking at the table 1 and look at the interest rates for money held on account and noticing that they're very, very low. And given your comment that we don't often approach the cap, there's usually quite a lot of headroom there. And I was just wondering, would it be better if we invested that money elsewhere in order to make a better return on it? I just wondered what your comments were about that.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, we can make better returns by moving that cash into other assets, but I would say that the cap is we never get near that cap. We do minimise the balances that we hold. You may think 20 million is quite a lot, but we do have pension payments that we need to pay out each month, and we have other sort of supplier payments that we need to make as well, such as, and you'll see it in the business plan, payments to our third-party administrator. So I believe that the cap is probably it's set as per the investment strategy. We won't go near that cap, but I believe the cap is there and it gives us that flexibility. We do get sometimes we get contributions from employers who may want to pay 3 or 4 months of employer contributions in advance. And so when you get that sum of money coming in, it could quickly move you up into near the cap levels. And we tend to get that at the start of a year following valuation, in that some employers who may have cash surpluses may want to benefit from paying their employer contributions up front to get those contributions working quickly. The cash flows are reducing that liability interest. So the cap is there for a purpose. We don't get anywhere near it, but I do take
resilience in the system.
There is some resilience. That would be correct.
Thank you.
My question is somewhat related to that, and that is that our next audited accounts might well show that we've, and we'll be discussing this later on in the meeting, a significant increase in the assets of the fund, and therefore that cap is going to rise quite significantly. And I'm just concerned that if we're not getting anywhere near it on a regular basis, then perhaps it's set too high. And I'm thinking maybe at the time we bring back the issue in relation to the caps limit, could we just have a reflection on whether or not that 1% is an appropriate number nowadays, and maybe 0.75% or something might be more appropriate?
I absolutely take on board that comment, Chairman. For instance, the assets under management now about approaching 5.8 billion, 58 million cap would not be appropriate, because the pension payments we make out are nowhere near that sort of level. And so I would probably keep the cap at the current level or reduce it to about 40 million. I don't believe that as assets under management increase that we keep the cap at 1%. I think the cap should reflect what the cash flow requirements are. And if the cash flow, your outgoings are not anywhere near 58 million, then why do you have a cap at that level? And make the money go to the assets where they'll work and deliver the returns for the fund.
Okay, well, at an appropriate time in the future, when the next opportunity arises, perhaps we could have a reflection from officers on what that should be, and then we can make an agreement.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from anyone? No? Okay, I'm just going to, I'm having to switch between lots of screens here, so not as easy as it looks. So we've got the Treasury Management. The recommendation, I think, has been explained by Patrick. So could I ask everyone if they would indicate in the chat line whether they agree, disagree, or would like to abstain, please? I'm not imagining that ever there's going to be many people who are not going to agree with that, so I'm going to move on as we've got a lot on the plate today. Pensions Committee business plan for 2021-22, and hopefully, Patrick, you're going to be doing this one because that's what it says on my order form.
Correct, Chairman. I will be introducing this report and taking questions. And this is the annual business plan that we bring before the committee. And it is the plan for this forthcoming financial year, conscious of the fact that some of the members may not be on this committee going forward. The plan reflects the work that will be done over the next financial year. The plan sets out in a lot of detail the areas that we'll be focusing on. It gives members a recap of where the strategies that underpin the fund in section 6 and how often they are reviewed. I think I would like to draw attention to one in particular, and that is 6.5, the communication strategy. We have for some time been discussing in this committee the need to be on the front foot, so to speak, with regard to communications and getting our message out there, because there are a lot of good messages that are coming out from the work that this committee and the fund has done over the last couple of years, and reflecting on what we've done over the last 12 to 18 months. This committee has made a lot of very decisive decisions about investment managers. We've got a funding level which is at 105%. We've got a performance report in part 2 that shows that we've had above benchmark returns for the last 8 quarters. We've got above benchmark returns going out to 10 years and beyond. And so that's a really good reflection of all the work that this committee has done, and also the work that the working group of the 4 members from the cross-party working group that have spent additional time in working through some of the projects with officers, particularly around the equity protection, investment managers, decisions, to bring informed recommendations that officers have written reports for, but supported by that working group, to this committee for deliberation and decisions. But getting back to the communication strategy, I think it's very important for us that we unpick this, look at how we're getting our messages out. There is some, I've got some desires to improve the website, clearly signpost where our policies are, messages about carbon footprinting, responsible investment, the work that this committee will do over the next year, the making sure that stakeholders can, we've got correct employer communications and member communications set out, where fund assets are invested, and also some communications to those third-party stakeholder, sort of interested parties such as Divest Hearts, who take a lot of interest in our fossil fuel investments, and members will be wary of emails they will get from constituents asking questions about why the fund is not disinvesting. So we want to be clear about why we invest in the way we do, why we have this approach to not fettering managers. So for me, this is a big piece of work for the fund. There is also the work that's in the business plan about continuing onboarding of the assets into the access pool and the implementation of the investment strategy, which is about making the asset allocations to the asset classes that the committee agreed last year. And you'll see in the reports in part 2 that there's been a lot of work done there again by the working group, which brings recommendations about decisions on managers and the movement of funds to those new asset classes. In this report, you'll also see under section, just go to it, section, I think it's section, sorry about this, section 5, the pension administration budget. As you're aware, you approved at the last meeting the budget that the Hertfordshire Fund would go into partnership with the LPPA. This sets out in section 5 the budget contribution that we are being asked to pay into that a relationship, and we will be a partner with a number of other funds. It is going to be a lot higher than what we paid under the commercial arrangement that we had with the same organisation. And that's reflective of, again, the complexity of how the fund has evolved over a number of years and the iteration of the benefit schemes. And it's quite a lot more complex to when we agreed the commercial contract 10 years ago. But we've talked this committee through as officers on a number of occasions and positioned you to an understanding that we would be paying a lot more for this particular service going forward. I also talk in the report about training, and it's essential that because we're also in an election year, we're going to have probably a new intake of members to this committee. Training reflects the different sort of learning levels of the committee membership, so there will be induction training, but there will also be some training to target areas that where we did some analysis. You will be aware that you did some filled in some questionnaires in answer to questions that Hyman's, our actuary, did a survey with you last year, and we identified some areas where you were average or slightly below average when compared to peers, and that training plan, which is attached as one of the appendixes, reflects those areas. Training has been difficult in the past because we've had to try to shoehorn it into those informal meetings, but as you will see, because of the growing agenda of work that the fund is doing, those informal meetings have, to an extent, been hijacked to become formal meetings. And so the work that you've got at the 26th of March will have a lot of formal papers requiring decisions. So what I propose is that we use MS Teams. I think you as members are quite familiar now. We're happy to work in this way on MS Teams, and we do sort of light bite sessions with you and do induction training and training on particular subject matters, bringing in the specialists such as our lawyers, our actuary and investment consultants to deliver that training. That's all I was going to say on this particular report. I'm quite happy to take questions, but and there is quite a lot of detail in there, but I think you get a flavour of for where the work will be over the next 12 months.
Thank you, Patrick. Patrick, it's worth, I think, reflecting a little on the journey that we've undertaken since 2010, when I think the fund was I think 74% funded, around that level.
That's correct,
which was not a good place to be, I think, at the time. And if I'm not sure whether I was actually on the committee at that point, but I do recall shortly afterwards there was a plan engineered to ensure that we recovered from that position. And I think from bringing us from 74% to 105% now has been a phenomenal appreciation of the work which the Pensions Committee has done since that 2010 date. And whilst we were working yesterday on the pre-briefing, I think Stephen Pillsworth made an observation of the actions that the pension committee are renowned for taking, and perhaps he might just reflect on that again, just to let us feel that we're getting it right.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Pillsworth, Assistant Director of Finance here at the Council. The comment actually started from us running through this report, and I was reflecting that whilst, as Patrick has outlined, there is a substantial body of work for the coming year, if anything, I felt the report and the forward plan you see in Appendix A perhaps understated the work that committee do in part 2 of your meetings. And perhaps understandably, of course, this report doesn't make a great deal of that, but that's where you all do the active management of the fund and the fund managers. And of course, you will all know that this meeting's no exception to that, and there is a really substantial part 2 agenda. So I'll be careful what I say, because I'm referring to some part 2 items, and of course we need to keep the fund manager performance confidential. That's why it's in part 2, and I don't want to preempt decisions you may or may not make in that session. But you will know there are a number of reports there and recommendations arising from your active management of those fund managers. So, for example, there was a report in there about a potential take on of a new fund manager, reflecting the revisions to the investment strategy you've made. There's another report in there about an existing fund manager where you've had some concerns about performance, have undertaken a thorough review of that, but concluded there's actually some areas that are working that we should keep, and the areas that aren't working as well will change. And there's a third report in there, again, similarly, where you've got some concerns around a direction a fund manager is taking, and there's a recommendation in there for some fairly decisive action arising. So it's that sort of active management that perhaps isn't really apparent from this business plan report. That is why, I think, in my view, the fund is in a good position, and now we have seen that increase in the funding level. And as I say, that probably isn't apparent to everyone who might be reviewing this part 1 report. But I also think there's a not resting on laurels, and actually, even though we're in a very good position, it's that continued active management by committee that's going to keep the fund in a good place for all the 400 employers and the 100,000 members. So hopefully I've covered everything there, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I just wanted to the opportunity to review what work we do, which is not necessarily open to the public's gaze in part 1, is very limited. And I thought today was an opportunity for us to reflect on some of the decisive moves that we have made as a committee in ensuring that the people who we appoint to look after the funds of our members do so in the way in which we intended them to, and they perform in the way we intended them to. And if they don't, then we take action to ensure that they do. And although there are observers in part 2, which I think is right, and they do and even our union representatives on that observation team often comment on the decisive nature of our moves. Not many of the public are aware of that, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to draw that out a little as best I could. Any other questions from anyone, please, on this subject? Robin.
Yes, thank you.
Good to have you with us.
Okay, yeah, there was some difficulty getting in, which was a bit annoying because I'd prepared by turning the machine off overnight and hoping it would all work, but anyway, it didn't. But I'm here now anyway. So thank you, Chair. Yeah, 3 things I wanted to say. First of all, we should certainly publicise the better funding level at 105% now. I've been on this committee since 2006, and if I remember correctly, Patrick will correct me. I'm not sure if he's been there since 2006, but anyway, the funding level then back in 2006 was, I think, only about 60%. And we all set about on the then investment committee trying to rejig things and sort things out and do a long-term plan for recovery, which at last seems to have reached fruition in the sense that we're now over 100% funding. So I think that we do need to publicise that fact. And secondly, more generally, I think we need to make it clear to members that an awful lot of work goes on, yes, in part 2, but also a great deal of work goes on in the working party. It's not just the committee, even part 1 and part 2 items. There's, long meetings, and the 4 of us on the working party do look at things in great detail. And I would wish scheme members to be aware of that as well. So yes, publicise the 105% and publicise the fact we have a detailed working party that, in addition to these meetings, that spends a lot of time looking at things. And the third thing I want to say is on communications. We often get these circulars and other emails asking us to divest from this or that commodity or equity, class of equities. And I'm always reluctant. We're not getting into the details now, but one of the reasons I'm reluctant is because I don't know whether scheme members would in general wish us to, let us say, divest from oil or tobacco or something else, even if, and I'm not saying it does, but even if that made a slightly bigger risk to our investments. And I want to know whether Patrick or anyone else has thought of how we can actually ask scheme members what they think in terms of whether we should divest from, let us say, oil, even if that slightly reduces the return on our investments. I would like to see whether Patrick's got a view on whether we can do that, whether we can gauge members' opinion, in other words, on that. So those are my 3 points, Chair. Thank you.
Patrick, do you want to deal with that first before I invite Margaret in?
Yeah, so on the first point about the publicising of funding level and investment return performance, I spoke with the chairman and vice chairman yesterday about this, and we've agreed that the executive summary report that I prepared that covers those 2 appendices, there is no reason why that can't go into part 1 and the appendices then form part 2. The reason the appendices are in part 2 and essentially why that report has been there is because there is proprietary research and data from our consultants that we have been asked not to make public, but the executive summary paper, there is no reason why we can't put that into part 1, and that's what we'll be doing going forward. On the point about communications, which I did refer to in the business plan, yes, we do need to do a lot more work on this. We are conscious of the fact that we seem to be at times fighting fires in that we're on the back foot, and I really want to put this fund in a position where we're on the front foot, where I can say to these external groups, look, that's where the information is about how this fund manages its assets. This is the fiduciary responsibility of this committee. It's a non-executive function. They have been given this responsibility under regulations to manage these assets on behalf of the membership of the fund. And all this sort of signposting. The chairman over the last 12 months has been quite engaged with a number of these pressure groups. He also took part in an interview with a pensions age and setting out our position as a fund. And I did circulate that link to all you members in that response I prepared for constituent questions. On the last point, Robin, I think we have thought about this, how we get member engagement and their involvement, and this is about do you canvass the whole 100,000 membership of the fund, and what questions would you ask them, and where do you limit the questions? Is it about fossil fuel? There is another motion that is going on a council motion, a motion that will come to council about the Israeli-Palestine question, about investment in Israel and this fund holding shares in companies that are working in Israel. And I'll give an example. Caterpillar is one of those, and being urged by groups to disinvest. There is the tobacco question. There is, where does this stop? And so we have to be very mindful about sort of questions that we ask our members about putting in sort of disinvestments, targets. I think the fiduciary responsibility of this committee is to manage the fund and make sure there are sufficient assets in the pot to pay the members' benefits. The members' benefits are enshrined under regulations. They will get the money that they are entitled to under the regulations, but the employers, and we are one of them, have to pay in contributions, and it's really important that we manage those contribution rates. And the only way we can do that is by making the investment assets work and deliver the returns to keep us at that 100+ funding level. And so I think we need to be careful about asking questions that may involve disinvestment, that may hamper our investment managers' ability to deliver those returns. I do take on board that this is something we as officers and the committee will need to reflect on, and as we develop our RI policy, we may, under regulations that may come in the future, be required to ask our membership about disinvestment from certain sectors. But there is a paper further down on this Part 1 agenda that Mercer, a briefing note that Mercer provided, which the Minister of Pensions, Guy Opperman, clearly states he's not asking funds to disinvest or make set targets for carbon. And so we need to bear that in mind. This is a government minister saying this. So what this fund has done today, in my view, is we've been prudent. We've got this responsible investment policy, and we are evolving that over time. That's all I was going to say, Chairman.
Thank you, Patrick. Margaret.
Whoops, I'm muted. You can hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, can hear you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Patrick, for the template letter that you circulated. I'm sure other members have all had residents and constituents asking about the pension fund, Greenpeace, particularly to do with fossil fuels, but also to do with Israel. We haven't done the Israel letter yet, but we may need a template letter about that as well, I think, in the future. But I just wanted to say thank you. That was a very, very useful summary, Patrick, because whilst we know quite a lot, it was helpful for you to write that. So I just wanted to say thank you very, very much. I found that very useful, and I've sent it to all my group who have also said thank you for it. I was just going to say, I think I would really value, and a report over 4 years, because I feel I've worked really hard over the last 3 years on the pension working group, and Robin has mentioned that we have done a lot of work. I don't know if it was busy in the previous sort of regime before that, but I'm not sure how many people know how many hours the working group has really spent in the last 2 years in trying to make, the best decisions, the best strategy for our pension fund. And I actually would quite like it summarised just how many hours our working group has really spent, because my group had no idea really. They didn't realise just how much time we take, which has meant me changing my life a bit, because I wasn't expecting such a huge bite out of my time. But I'm mathematical, and I actually appreciate what we've been doing very much. But I just think other members should be aware how much time the working group has really spent for the good of our pension fund. So that was one thing, and I just wondered whether we could have, actually not just an annual report, but a brief executive 4-year report, just because you're right, some people may not be members in the future, that there could be changes to do with the committee membership, and I just think it would be really helpful. I don't know if that is possible, and I'm not saying it necessarily needs to be before May, but I would be very interested to just have a summary of decisions that have been made over 4 years. And the other thing I was going to say is I do think we should have a newsletter to our scheme members. Just sort of, we've been talking about, how our funding level has gone up. I don't know what it was actually originally in 2017, because when I arrived, I wasn't on the committee, but you've just said from 2010 to 2021, it's gone from 74% to 105%, and I agree that is, that's a good achievement, and we should publicise it. The other thing I think we should publicise over the last 2 years is our pensions employer contributions agreement policy to protect the interest of our scheme members, and that actually is also something that was brought in. We've just discussed it, to do with risk, and I think that the members should know about that as well.
Thank you, Margaret. Just before Patrick answers that, I'd just like to say that I think the last 2 or 3 years, the amount of work that's been required of us and what we have committed to has increased significantly from previous years. The amount of change that's been necessary to adapt to, and the transformation of the fund from its previous strategy to its new strategy has taken a lot of time and effort, and Patrick may want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Margaret, you're sort of already given me, I've already had some ideas about how we do communications with stakeholders, but I've also been reflecting on, we don't do a sort of end of year report that is signed off by the chairman of the fund, and that's one thing that I really want to do, and that would be for putting on the website so that employers and members have access to this information. It would be about how the fund has performed over the year, what work has been done under the committee and the approval of recommendations, how the strategy has moved over the year, and again, the newsletter, we've actually spoken to one of our consultants about doing an employer newsletter, setting out certain pieces of information, both on the liability and asset side. So those are thoughts that are in my mind, and I've got an officer who's going to be working with me. We'll be working with our web designers and our internal comms team in order to progress this over the next 12 months. But also we'd welcome the input of whoever is on the working group in testing this, and I'll probably invite maybe a board member as well, because they represent the employers and membership of the fund, and I think it's very important that a board member sits with that working group to particularly develop this communication strategy. On the working group work that has been done over the last, well, I would say 2 years definitely, it has been a lot of complex work that's involved a large commitment from those members, and I as an officer know that, and the consultants who are on this call as well know, we would never have progressed this work without their involvement and their ability to set time aside to help us deliver where we are at the moment. I think this is where we're at the moment is a fund that's got a really good funding level. We're transitioning our assets to diversify and mitigate risk to new managers. We're making really informed decisions that is based on quite heavy analysis of managers, and I'll use the equity protection. For example, the number of meetings, I think we've had about 8 or 9 meetings on this particular subject matter, and you will also hear about this on the 26th of March. How complex, detailed, and the amount of detail that this working group and officers have seen in order to produce what we've got in place at the moment, and how it's going to evolve into this dynamic structure that's going to be proposed at the meeting on the 26th. It's been a lot of hard work from those members, and I really appreciate the support of the chairman and those members on that working group in getting us to where we are, and that's evidenced by a lot of those Part 2 papers.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to come in with a couple of points. I mean, I think firstly, just to echo Patrick's comments about how important the working group is, all those items I mentioned earlier that are considered in Part 2, in pretty much all of those cases, the working group is the body that's done a lot of that work to then refine and bring recommendations forward. Certainly, Patrick and I know how critical it is to the operation of Pensions Committee, and when committee reconvenes after the elections, certainly making sure we've got something similar in place moving forward, I think is going to be really important. The second point, I think Margaret helpfully mentioned the recent queries some of you had from residents about some of the investments and responsible investment issues. And I believe the response drafted has been circulated to committee members. But Patrick and I have also had a discussion with the chair about, exactly in line with some of the comments Margaret was making, why shouldn't we turn that response into a letter that goes to all employers, district councils and others, because we thought that was a really good overview of a lot of work the committee has done within the last year on that responsible investment issue and the huge progress that has been made. So if it was acceptable to committee, we would turn that into a letter and get that out as almost sort of the very first thing of all those steps Margaret suggested and Patrick gave you an update on.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions from anyone? I'm not seeing any. Oh, Bob Deering.
Yeah. Ralph, thank you very much, Ralph and everybody. I just wanted to make two very broad comments. If we go back about 10 minutes in this conversation, I was very struck at the way in which, just in passing, I think it was initially Patrick and then I think you endorsed it, Chair, just simply commented that you'll struggle to find a better pension provision than we are providing here at Hertfordshire. And those comments were made in a totally modest way. There was no self-congratulation in it, and I think that just speaks volumes. And I think the level of competence in what this committee does under your chairmanship, Ralph, and with Patrick as the lead officer and the working group is terrific. And I think we should definitely improve and increase our communication about that. It's just an extraordinarily high level of competence, which we should be quite proud of, I think. And the other very broad comment I'd just like to make, again, goes back to, I think, comment of Patrick about 10 minutes ago, and that is that education for members of the committee is important. We've been provided with very good briefings and whatnot, and I think it's very important that that continues in the next electoral cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll turn to the recommendations. I'm going to read these ones because they do have specific implications. That the committee notes the content of this report and comments whether they wish to see any further items on the forward agenda. I think we've made a couple of observations which I'm sure Patrick has picked up that will get included in the forward plan. But the second item is that the Pensions Committee approves a core contribution of 2.7 million to the LPPA budget for the administration of the fire and local government pension scheme. Clearly, that's endorsing the item which outlines the new arrangement with LPPA. So can I ask you all in chat to either agree, disagree or abstain, and then we'll move on. Thank you. Okay, I think that's agreed. Our next item is an update on the access pool. And Patrick, I think this is yours again.
Yes, it is, Chairman. Thank you. So this is my quarterly update to provide members of this committee on the work that the officers from the 11 funds in Access and the joint committee chairman have been progressing since the last quarter. In the summary, it provides you some background as to why Access in particular is renting an operator, and the appointment of Link Fund Solutions, who manage this on our behalf. 2.4 talks about the total assets in the pool sub-funds. With Link, we've got just under 2 billion, including the investment in the Longview Fund. We've also got total assets under Access Pool Governance is 3.6 billion, and that's including passive assets with UBS. That reflects 62% of the assets of the Hertfordshire Fund is now under pool governance, and Section 9 sets out some further details for members of the committee, and sets out some details of certain assets that won't be pooled, and that is because, as I've explained in the past, the legal agreements that underpin those relationships, in that they are limited liability partnerships that really can't be broken without incurring significant breakout costs. Section 5 talks about the assets under management in Asset Access. At 31st December, there was 20.4 billion under the Access a relationship with Link, and that's in 22 funds, and that's up from 14.3 billion in the last quarter. Hertfordshire's just got over 10% of those pool assets. And when we compare, and the chairman and I discussed yesterday with the vice chairman, how we rank alongside other pools, I would say that we are in the top 2 for the pooling of assets. And that is reflective of the arrangement that we have put in, the structure we've put in place, in that we've got a rented operator, and that the payback time for delivering savings is a lot shorter for this pool as opposed to some of the other pools where they've set up investment management structures because of the way that they have in the past as funds managed assets internally. 5.5 talks about, and I know members have asked questions about this in the past, about illiquid structures. So these are illiquid assets such as private equity and property, and how we develop in this piece of work. And Ralph will be, the chairman will be attending the joint committee on Monday, where there is a paper setting out the work that the officer group, which I'm a member of, will be doing over the next couple of months to put in a provider to help us make the appointments to the various asset classes. We've agreed the structures, the legal structures that will underpin these various asset classes. Now we need to appoint a advisor who can implement those structures for us and help us appoint the underlying managers. That's quite a detailed piece of work. We were hoping to get the joint committee sign this off before the elections, but because of the nature of the work, and that it is the area of assets that will probably deliver the most savings, we want to be really clear about the specification and the requirements of that specification. So that work, we've agreed that it will be take place over the next few months, with a paper going back to the joint committee in September. The savings, again, I've talked about the savings in the past. In 5.7, they're projected to be just under 900,000. There's been a fall in the UBS savings, and you may ask the question, why has it gone from under, I think we've previously reported about 900,000 to where it is now, I think it's over 500. And the reason is because we've moved some of the index-linked gilts that were in that UBS pooled fund to our Insight, who are running this equity protection, and they use that £500 million worth of index links gilts as collateral for that equity protection. Section 7 sets out the proposed budget for 21-22, and that's been reviewed by the Section 151 officers of all the 11 funds and approved by the Joint Committee at its meeting in January. The contribution per authority will be increasing this year. It's going up to 113,000, and that's a £13,000 increase. And primarily that's due to we're increasing the permanent staff who are on the access support unit. We're introducing 2 more officers into that structure because of the growing work. There is a number of, and the chairman will be aware of this, a number of different work streams and working groups that are formed of fund officers that are working on developing a common responsible investment policy, looking at onboarding more active listed investments, working on this non-investment, the sort of illiquid assets, working on reporting, and also working on governance. There's about 5 groups, and officers from all the funds are having to do that work as well as their local fund work. And then in section 9, I've already said that there's more detail about the pooled assets, and section 10 talks about provides you with an update on the Link takeover. Those bids were rejected, and we're in constant dialogue with Link about any future bids, and they will keep us appraised. That's all I was going to say, Chairman. Happy to take questions from members of the committee, and the report is for noting.
Thank you, Patrick. I'd just like to make some observations. I think the good judgment which we've been referring to by the committee in terms of managing the Hertfordshire Fund over the period of time that I've been involved with it, I think also reflects on the access pool's good judgment in terms of its assessment of the pooling arrangements that were available for it 2-3 years ago when it was asked to be set up by the government, and the choices it made, and the outcomes which have derived from those choices have been, as we have been very successful in achieving the objectives that were set out, savings and ensuring that we were able to move smartly and quickly, not overburden the pool with massive overhead costs in setting up our own internal management structures, and I think along with the other members of the pool, there are, is it 11, Patrick? I'm just making sure we got it right. 11. They have all been. I think when we chose to go into access, we were quite late in terms of joining it. But when we looked at the management structure and the people who were engaged with it, we saw that they all had like opinions that we did. And I think we chose wisely when we went in. And since then, we've made very good choices going forward. And I think we are, as I think Patrick said, one of the top 2 performing pools in the country. So I think that's a feather in our cap as well. Any other questions from other members, please? No. Okay. Clearly, Patrick, you and I have done a sterling job in answering all the potential questions. I'm just going to go to the. It's just a recommendation to note the contents of the report. Can I ask you in the chat function to agree, disagree, or abstain, please? And I'm going to anticipate that that's going to be an agreed. So we have the final item in part 1, which is the Hertfordshire County Council's Pension Fund Responsible Investment Report. And I think this is going to be a shared presentation between Patrick and, is it Peter?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Ah, there we are. Okay, so Peter's going to take it on straight. So you can relax a little bit, Patrick.
I'm happy for Peter to take this one on.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so we've got a note in the pack there that just sets out a speech made by Guy Opperman, the Pensions Minister, really setting out what we should expect from the regulatory framework around RI for pension funds in the UK. Now, it's very specific to the corporate sector pensions arena because the LGPS sits in a slightly different legislative and regulatory structure. But what we can see is the ambition for overall regulators and policymakers that very much maps over to what will be expected of the LGPS as well. So it's very much relevant. I won't go through it in detail because of that mapping, but I will use it to pull out 3 key points. The first of all is when he says that the UK will be a leader in climate change requirements for pension schemes by setting requirements for pension schemes to measure and publish analysis on climate change risks and RI more generally. What it serves to demonstrate, I think, is all the good work that the Pensions Committee has done and the working group has done as well on ESG considerations, on RI considerations, in terms of measuring the asset managers and how they integrate ESG factors into the way they invest. The work we've done around measuring climate change risk and carbon intensity of the portfolio, looking at ways of improving or reducing that carbon intensity through some of the managers we've put in place, really serves to show that the Hertfordshire Fund and the work that's been done by the committee have already set the fund on that path to being a leader on RI considerations. So very much validating the work that's already been done. But it also goes to set out what we can do in the future. So there's a strong emphasis in there on a framework called Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD for short, something that we've spoken about in the past. It's a very good framework to set about thinking about climate change, thinking about carbon risk, putting some structure around it into a formal report to make sure we're managing those risks and tying those risks back to investment risks as well. So we think about climate change risk being very much integrated with other investment risks, such as equity risk, credit risk, and all the other risks that we're familiar with. So that's something that's very much on the agenda of the regulator, but always been, also has been on the agenda of the committee and the working group. It's something that we'll come back with a paper with on the 26th of March meeting as well, to progress that conversation slightly further and look to really formalise all the work that we've been done into that framework and see if that's something we want to submit in the future, but just taking the next step on measuring some of those risks. The other thing I would pull out, and it's something Patrick mentioned earlier, is around the disinvestment question. So he said there that disinvestment is not the answer. We want to use disinvestment as a tool to manage some of these ESG risks. We also want to think about responsible investment and ESG holistically. Of course, climate change is a big factor in that, but we want to think about other factors as well. So we want to use disinvestment as a way of expressing our broader ambitions in terms of carbon intensity of the portfolio, also some of the social issues as well, in terms of making sure that as an economy and as an asset owner, we transition to a low carbon economy. We make sure that that is a just transition, and we're looking after societies and areas of the economy that have relied on fossil fuels and making sure they come along on the transition with us, and see certain firms that may be part of a divestment policy as key firms and key partners in that transition to the green economy. So a lot of good work's been done. A lot of work will be on the agenda to take things further, particularly as RI considerations is an evolving piece of work. The amount we can measure is materially better than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, and 5 years hence it will be better still. So something that will be on the agenda for a long time. A lot of work has been done by the committee and a lot of progress has been made, and we will carry on making sure it's a key focus in broader investment strategy decisions as well as in isolation. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Has anyone got a question for Peter on this subject? Okay, Stephen Bolton.
Just one point on how we invest in companies which are improving. And I think, for example, British Petroleum, obviously fossil fuel producers for years and years and years, but now doing a huge amount of work to get away from that and change the whole nature of their business. what I wouldn't want us to do is to start looking at things historically and saying, because you were at one time a fossil fuel producer, we will no longer invest with you. I think we need to look at where we're going in the future. And I also think it's important, there will be many bandwagons to jump on in the next few years, as they are already, many calls for boycotting certain companies. And I just think we need to be aware that that will be a changing situation.
Thank you, Stephen. Peter, do you want to make any comments regarding that?
Yeah, absolutely. We would be fundamentally in agreement with that approach. There are firms that come under broad divestment policies that are part of this journey, and it is very much about the journey from where we are to where we want to get to. And some of those firms are important in that. Other firms in that sector won't embrace that change, and what we want to make sure we do is identify the ones that are on the right pathway, which will lead to reduction in risk, and we can talk about this being an investment risk, but also give us opportunities to generate more return as well if we think about a broad holistic risk and return of the overall portfolio. So yes, I would absolutely agree. And also I would echo the point about evolution of approach. Things will change, the way we approach things and measure things and look at things will become more sophisticated, and I think it's important we give ourselves scope to be able to evolve as those measurement techniques change as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Richard, did you want to come in?
Well, thanks for the invitation. I just wanted to say how much I support what Stephen Bolton said. And it does occur to me that if you just take BP as an example, who knows what will happen in the future? Who knows whether we will actually find that certain products like oil and coal, by modern techniques we don't even know about, could be quite safe once again. So that's why I think we need to have that attitude. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to comment on tobacco. Actually, I do know we've talked about fossil fuels, but in COVID, we haven't really discussed the increased risk of death for smokers in COVID, or how smoking is really contributing to climate change. And could that be included in our considerations of ESG to a slightly higher degree? I'm very, very conscious also that the world view is really turning on tobacco at the moment. But, you know, BAT does appear to still make profits, but I really would be much happier if we disinvested from tobacco. But we are gradually, as it comes up, we have really, I noticed in practice, several of our investors have actually have disinvested, but I just wondered whether we were ready to make what I would call a more ethical decision about that policy.
Thanks, Margaret. I think that's something that's going to be an opportunity to review in the new structure once the election's over. I think identifying particular products or business models where we have a fundamental problem with, I think that needs to be discussed, and I'm sure it will be a subject matter that's going to come up in the near future. Robin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to make the following point, and I make it just about every time this issue comes up. There is an impression out amongst the public and those who write to us sometimes that if you hold equities in a particular company, then you are somehow helping or giving funds to that company. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the way the equity markets work, because it's only true that you're giving money to the company in which you hold shares if you happen to buy those shares in the initial offering or the initial placement. By holding shares in a company, you're not helping that company. You're not giving money to that company. I think we just need to make that clear in our communications, and I've made this point before. The argument therefore comes down to not that you're giving money to a company and therefore not helping, say, a fossil fuel producer or a tobacco company. You're not doing that. The argument comes down, it seems to me, to whether or not we are comfortable in taking an income from the earnings of those companies. That's a moral issue, and I can see that is a question, but we just need to make sure that when people write to us or when we discuss this, we're quite clear that holding shares or even buying shares in those companies does not send funds or give help to those companies. The issue is whether we're happy taking an income from those companies, and it is a viable argument to say we don't want to take income from tobacco shares, we don't want to take income from fossil fuel shares. I'm not saying I agree with that, I'm saying it's a viable argument, and that's why I come back to what I said earlier, which is that I'm not actually prepared to say as an individual that I don't want to take income from a tobacco company, or I don't want to take income from a fossil fuel company or whatever, until I've heard the views of our members, because it might impact on whether or not we can later pay their pensions. That's the point. It's not a simple argument. The equity markets don't work like that. And I think some people who, the members of the public, need to be aware of that. And we just need to make that point to them. And I don't think we ever have done, that holding shares in a company does not in itself help that company. It actually means you're taking funds from that company. And therefore it boils down to the moral argument about whether you're happy to do that. And I'm not sure what the views of our members, 100,000 of his members, would be on that. Thank you. Thanks, Robin, for your comments. I think there are some subtle differences between what you just said and the actuality. I think if you buy shares, then you're supporting the company's share price, and the share price is an important factor from their perspective in terms of being able to borrow money and all sorts of other things. But I take your point, you're not actually putting money in their bank account as a consequence of buying a share that's not an original share that's been sold by the company. Yeah, I understand that point, Chair. Just all sorts of things affect share prices. That's indeed. The point. Yeah, okay, indeed. Thanks. Great. Peter, is there anything you wanted to say on that, or should we move on?
Happy to move on if there's no more questions.
Okay. I think as there are no further questions, I think the requirement is just to note the report. So if in chat you do that for me, please. Okay, I think we're going to end up with an agreement on that one. Right, I think we've reached a point at which we have a natural break if we're going to move into part two. I'm going to just ask the committee if they would be prepared to move into part two, and we'll do so after a break, and I'll give everybody 9 minutes until 11:40. I'll tell you, it's ticked over again. We'll make it 11:45. We'll be back in our chairs at 11:45, and we'll take up the part two agenda. Thank you very much. Just leave all your items on, but turn your cameras and microphones off. Thank you.